responsibility that Fiddler on the Roof had to be right.
Damn it.
That was 17 years ago.
Yeah, it was great.
I understand, but that was, I guess I don't remember,
Oh, it was great.
but it was 17 years ago. So yeah, that's what Tim Ben said. So I felt like a responsibility that, like, if they messed up, even if I didn't know Andy, I was like, our community can't do Fiddler on the Roof. That's really hard. It's really hard. I mean, there's dancing, there was dancing and singing and music. I can't. I know. It's unbelievable. Like, it's just, it's so crazy to think that there's people with that kind of talent in our midst. And they're just like normal people, that's the guy who's the minister. I mean, I guess some of that is a little bit of performance, but the guy who's doing your plumbing and whatever, that's community theater. But man, there's some talented people out there. Scary.
He's not afraid. The girl, the daughter, the middle daughter.
Yeah.
Her voice. So
She was good.
I was reading the
Hodel.
her mother is a voice coach. Yeah, voice coach, and was also in it. Her mother was the mother. Oh, Tevia's wife.
Oh, so Carla, we're talking about people who are in the cast. Carla is in the choir. She's actually at Valencia United Methodist, and she's in the choir there.
She's and my friend Donna.
Yeah, the wife. So the woman that was, and your friend was, I think you're right. I think you're right. She was really good. It's just so good. Anyways, go see it if you can. If you're out here, it's just, it was good. And it was really good. I really, like, I can feel comfortable recommending it, and not feeling like I'm just saying, go see it. And they're like, why did you tell me to see that? Which I have done that before. You have to learn enough about me to know when I'm doing my job, which is telling somebody, you got to see these kids. They're the best, especially with kids. You don't want to. Yeah, you have to. I mean, right. You have to. What are you going to do? Especially with kids. I mean, can't have these kids feeling terrible. But anyways, but it's not the case. So that's good to know. And as people saw, the speaking of Fiddler, well, not really Fiddler, but of course the Tevia's wife, Golda, made me think about Golda, the movie. So we're screening it in 3 weeks from tonight with the Lemley. So just to make it clear, the interview with Helen Mirren is taped, but only being shown during that screening. So it's not like she's there. Helen Mirren is not in Santa Clarita. I want to make it clear. I know it may have been confusing, but she's not there. She's not going to be in Santa Clarita. Not yet, at least. Maybe we'll work on getting there for high holidays. No, I now that I even said that as a joke, someone's going to say, he said she's going to be here. Yeah. So we sold out. I know. Well, it's possible, but so the 7:00 screening got sold out. I asked them to add another one. They have a 4:00 screening, which I posted yesterday or last night. The 7:00 one, though, they've added another 7:00 one. So we have a whole nother 7:00 one that is in a bigger theater. So the 7:00 one is sold out. But if you go, it's confusing because there's two 7:00s. If you go to the second 7:00, that one is wide open. So the 23rd, it's 3 weeks from tonight. Again, I apologize that we're not going to have class, but this is done through something called Fathom Events, which is doing Jewish movies, and they're working with Lemleys and other small screens, art house theaters around the country, and they're doing these screenings. So they did the Soul Doctor one, the one about Shlomo Karlebach last month, in June, and then they're doing one with they're doing a few that and so when they're doing these special screenings, they're doing them with with these special kinds of interviews and things like that. So let me just show you one thing quickly. If you go to because I just want to, I know, I'd like to have seen that. But yeah, some of these are just not, they're just not, you just can't do them. So this one for Golda is it's a special engagement. It's called Fathom, and
It's sold out.
it's
Good.
yeah, it's good, but first of all, we had more time to promote it. Usually we only have a couple weeks or a week, even in some cases. And it's just because that they don't have, they don't have a way of doing it. I'm just going to show everybody just quickly.
What do you mean? Email to CBS?
What?
Bottom to us and then put it on the blast a month ahead.
Well, yeah, in this case, I wanted to make sure our congregants actually got a chance to get the tickets. It's sold out. I mean, I'm not like so again, some people go, you took rabbinic license with that. I'm here. So I for those who didn't see it, I posted it up on our TBA Facebook page, which is one of the best ways to communicate. So when I put it up there 2 days ago, there were only 2 seats or 4 seats sold, the ones that I bought for my kids wanted actually to see this, which is cool. But I can tell you, I posted it. I posted it on, let me just show people. I posted it. I posted it 2 days ago, and
It sold out.
yeah,
Wow.
I posted it. So this is the I'm putting it up on the screen. Not yet, until we have a chance. This is the screen. There's 2 seats in the back there are 2 disabled, whatever you're supposed to say, disabled row. But that's that theater. So then we added the 4 o'clock one, and this one we just added today or yesterday, and that one's not half done, but it's pretty close. So that's the 4 o'clock screen. I have not posted, and this is the thing that's a little confusing. There's another 7 o'clock. There's another 7 o'clock screening now, and I don't know how I found it. I'm trying to find out how to get it, but yeah, this one I just posted. I posted it last night. So this 4 o'clock one is done, but they did give me, like I said, they gave us another. They gave us another 7 o'clock one, and we will, like I said, we'll post. I haven't posted that link for this other. This is the 4 o'clock one, but again, some people aren't going to be able to see a 4 o'clock one. But they gave us the much larger theater of. They gave us a much larger theater that. So I said to Greg Lemley, I said, what are you going to do when I sell out this theater? So he said, this is what he said last night. He said, he wrote back, this was this morning, I think. He said, what happens when this one sells out? And he said, I guess I'm buying drinks, is what he said. That was his answer. I'm buying drinks, is what he said. But I, look, it was great that we were able to do that. I'm going to show you one other email that I got today, folks, which is very exciting. So if people can see that this has actually happened, I got this morning at 3:43 in the morning. Dear Rabbi, the following is a fight that we thought will be good fit for your needs. June 24th to July 4th from LAX. Birthright trip. So that was the dates that they gave me this morning. So we're going to start trying to look at making sure we can get that together. And it's real. That's real.
So that's the birthright.
Uh-huh. So that's real exciting that that's happening too for us. Oh, actually, yeah. Yeah. So well, I tried to open up the last one, but. All right, folks. So you can see we're hard at work doing stuff. And hopefully some good news for these things. Anyways, yeah. So let's see if we can sell out another Golda, and I'm hoping it's good. I have not seen it. I saw a trailer. I saw an interview with Helen Mirren about it. I think she's good. So I gotta think it's going to be a great movie, but I have not seen it, and I'm not going to, I mean, if I see it, it'll be 2 or 3 days before you do, if you do on the 23rd. It doesn't come out until the 25th. That's the first day that it's screening, whatever, in America. All right. So to Deuteronomy, folks, and we are actually, last week we finished up with Va'et Hanan, which is the Torah portion that we actually read last week, which it means that this week we're actually reading this week's portion. I think this week, tonight, we probably won't get all the way through the end of Ekev, which is the third portion of Deuteronomy. It starts, as you can see right here, in chapter 7, halfway through. This is the way we broke it, which, as I told you before, and I'll probably get sick of telling you, and you'll get sick of hearing it, it's very hard to break Deuteronomy, both by chapters, by the way the Christians broke it, and by the way we broke it as Torah portions, as Parshiot. This place in Ekev, or at chapter, well, again, we didn't ever called it chapter 7, but for us now to say chapter 7, verse 12, does seem like a really good place to break it, only because the last words that we read last week, therefore observe faithfully the instruction, the laws, and the rules which I charge you this day, Hayom. And we have that phrase a lot. Now, this Torah portion, and last week, again, for those who weren't here, to remind people, we read the 10 Commandments and we read the Shema. Va'et Hanan has those two things. And again, as I told you, it's possible that when the Shema says, take to heart these words which I command you this day, that it's talking about the 10 Commandments. It's also possible it's talking about the whole book of Deuteronomy, which might have been read at one point all at once, which means any break that we have today is somewhat arbitrary and is maybe not the way it's intended to be read. So if they sat down and read it all in one day, that means that for 4 or 5 hours, people heard the book of Deuteronomy being read to them. Is it possible? Very much so. It's very possible that they had people read it, and maybe they had 2 or 3 people read the sections of it, or maybe one person, that was their job, to read the book of Deuteronomy out once a year to everybody. We don't know for sure. Was it a public recitation of the 10 Commandments? Possibly, but there are so many other laws that we're going to have. They're going to start to develop. We haven't seen them yet, though the Shema and Ve'ahavta itself, when it says bind them as a sign on your, on your arm, and be a reminder between your eyes, that becomes the mitzvah of tefillin, and to some extent becomes a mitzvah on its own. But we're going to start to see commandments laid out that are not just the 10 Commandments. We really haven't seen them yet. We're going to start to see them a little bit this week, but really more next week in the portion Re'eh. Ekev, the portion that we're reading from today, I thought about whether I should say this or not. This is probably the least memorable part of the book of Deuteronomy. So I probably, again, how am I to judge that? I'm only telling you that it's very hard to remember when you're telling somebody what's in Ekev, to remember what's in it. Deuteronomy, Devarim, begins with the beginning of Devarim. You go, well, what's in Devarim? Also not as memorable. We read it 2 weeks ago, but it's the introduction to the book of Deuteronomy. It sets up what Deuteronomy is. It's the opening portion. It's the opening words. Chapter 2, or the second parsha of that Hanan, has the 10 Commandments, and it has the Shema, very memorable. Ekev isn't quite as memorable, because when we get to the next portion, we get a lot of laws. I mean, I can go through, like Deuteronomy, I know portion by portion, and I can tell you, well, this is, I'm sitting down with a kid and the kid says, what's in my Torah portion? I can tell them what's in their Torah portion pretty well for obviously most Torah portions, but for Deuteronomy, it's very easy. Ekev is the hardest to do. Re'eh, next week's portion was actually my bar mitzvah portion, and so I remember it pretty well. I've had to do a lot of bar mitzvahs. I think that this portion and last week's portion, that Hanan, are some of the least studied or least read, at least by me and a lot of people, because it oftentimes hits us in July and maybe August. And people are either too hot, they're not here, they're at camp, and there just aren't a lot of bar mitzvahs for Hanan and Ekev. I remember as a kid, when I was at a Jewish day school, nobody had bar mitzvahs during this time. It was like my portion, Re'eh, which I read at the end of August. It's generally not until then that you start getting people back from school, and a lot of kids didn't want to have a bar mitzvah in July. I mean, they just didn't. They didn't want to have it the first week because no one would be, well, not nobody, but a lot of kids would have been at camp or traveling with their parents. So we don't study it as much, and it's kind of, almost a forgotten portion, but I guarantee you there's some stuff in here that you'll see, that you'll remember, that maybe you'll see why again, why every portion that we read in Deuteronomy has something that bless you, that you'll remember and that you'll take away. So let's take a look here. We're starting in chapter 7. Any questions or comments or anything before we start? And again, you're going to see some of the language that we say, the Deuteronomy language, that is very, very obvious as words from Deuteronomy. And as we said, it sometimes pops up in the book of Jeremiah, in the book of Lamentations, and parts of the Deuteronomistic history that we kind of recognize and go, hey, that's Deuteronomy language. Like this. And if you do obey these rules and observe them carefully, your God Adonai will maintain faithfully for you the covenant made on oath with your fathers, right? Well, we just read last week, therefore observe faithfully the instruction. Now, look, we broke it here. You could make the argument, how do you break it when the next line says, and if you do follow the rules and laws, which you just finished in last week's portion telling us you're supposed to, now we start to get into what happens. And so if you do it, God will favor you and bless you and multiply you, blessing your issue from the womb and your produce from the soil, your new grain and wine and oil, the calving of your herd and the lambing of your flock, in the land sworn to your fathers to be assigned to you. So what do you get? What's the blessing? You get to multiply. You get to be fruitful and multiply, both your crops, your animals, and your people, your families. And again, these words, your cows multiply, and your sheep and your goats. So all of those things. And again, in the land, not just random places, but in the place where I swore to your ancestors, to your fathers. So that's a phrase that we're going to get a lot in Deuteronomy, into the land that I swore to your ancestors, right? To your fathers. You shall be blessed above all other peoples. There shall be no sterile male or female among you or among your livestock. So when it's talking about,
That's amazing.
it's talking about animals, it's also talking about people. Adonai will ward off from you sickness. God will not bring upon you any of the dreadful diseases of Egypt, about which you know, but will inflict them upon your enemies. So you won't see those plagues, right? You won't see those plagues that will happen back to the Egyptians. They'll happen to your enemies instead. So God will keep those things away from you. And here it says, you shall destroy all the peoples that your God Adonai delivers to you, showing them no pity, and you shall not worship their gods, for that will be a snare to you. Now that is something we also see in Deuteronomy over and over again. You're going to destroy the people, and you're not destroying the people because you're a bloodthirsty person. You're doing it so that you do not get trapped into their gods, so that you don't worship their gods. That's why you do it. You do it so that you don't have,
And nobody.
well, some people did, but not enough. And again, this begs the question. If this was written after the fact, that means they didn't do it. How do we know they didn't do it? Well, the Bible tells us they didn't do it. So if the person who wrote this is writing this in Moses's voice, that means that Moses told them to and they didn't listen. Which means they didn't, whatever you want to look at, whether this was written by Moses, written after the fact, it didn't happen. So they either didn't listen to Moses, or somebody said, you know why we kept worshiping these other gods? Because we didn't wipe out the Canaanites and didn't get rid of their gods. Should you say, should you say to yourselves, these nations are more numerous than we, how can we dispossess them? You need have no fear. You have to but bear in mind what your God Adonai did to Pharaoh and all the Egyptians, the wondrous acts that you saw with your own eyes, the signs and the portents, the mighty hand and the outstretched arm by which your God Adonai liberated you. Thus will your God Adonai do to all the peoples you now fear. Now, this is another thing that we see in Deuteronomy over and over again, and why it's so important that it's Moses' voice. Because Moses uses the Egyptian example time and again for two things. Number one, to teach the people that God can do anything. God could punish the Egyptians, could punish the most important and most powerful empire at the time. So God can do that. So nobody is as powerful as the Egyptians. So if God can do that, and then the other thing that is there in telling the people about the Egyptians is this idea of reminding people that the Egyptians they were our enemy. Now, why is that critical? Because during the time of Jeremiah that we're reading about, the Egyptians were, at least in Jeremiah's book, not people to rely on. And so there was a double whammy that happens with the Egyptians. So you both remember that God can do these things and remember the Egyptians. And that's why they're invoked all the time. So you'll see Egypt be invoked all the time. It's invoked so many times that when our ancestors 2,000 years ago, 500, 600 years after this was written down, at least, when we wrote the Haggadah, as much as we quote Exodus, which we do, I mean, Exodus is quoted in the Haggadah, Deuteronomy is quoted more. Deuteronomy is quoted over and over again, and you'll see it. I'll point it out too when it's like a huge section. But this kind of section right here, this is what we say every year at Passover.
Mhm.
And it's because the way Deuteronomy presents it is so powerful and is so, it calls our attention to the fact that God can do amazing things and God can liberate us and free us. And here it's flat out.
And they didn't believe them.
Yes. And so what this does is it tells people, hey, God did that for us before, God can do it for us again. And so it reminds that there's a precedent for God's redemption. So you see it throughout the book of Deuteronomy. You'll see it throughout. And again, it's one of the reasons why we quote it. And by the way, I already showed you one, which you already saw, which is that's why you teach your children what God did for us when we came out of Egypt. We already saw two mentions of it, which are the basis for the four sons, as Glory told us last week. When we see that you shall teach your child what God did for you when you came out of Egypt, we love that so much that it's not only in the Haggadah, it's one of the most memorable parts of the Haggadah. Yeah, John.
Back to Noah.
Yeah.
Shem, Ham.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to get.
You love that. John loves the origin stories of these people. Yep.
I think God focused mostly on the descendants of Shem.
Yeah.
What happened to Ham and
What happens to them
I know
later?
what happened. I understand
Yeah.
that
Ham is not kosher.
Ham is not kosher, as Mike said, and Ham is definitely not kosher in our mind because the descendants of Ham, which are the Egyptians, the Canaanites, they're the people we don't want to have anything to do with.
Children of God,
Yeah,
all of them.
yeah,
So
So we have an origin story in Noah to tell us that the descendants of Ham are messed up. Why? I don't know. It's a third of the world. But the Bible says that a third of the world is messed up. I don't know what to tell you other than, you can.
I understand, but we're going back.
John, I don't want to give you my percentage of the world that's screwed up, but it's probably more than a third. But anyways, I don't want to go there, but that's probably it was a tough one because it included the Egyptians who were very powerful. But the fact that they were descendants of Ham meant that they were inherently flawed. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that the Egyptians are messed up. Well, actually, or they always are messed up, or that they have to be messed up. You're going to see a line specifically in Deuteronomy that at least allows for the Egyptians to have some re-entry into the group.
Was Noah Jewish?
Was Noah Jewish? Noah in our minds is pre-Jewish, right?
Yeah.
So he is,
But God
he has,
cares.
yes, so he is
Chosen for-
a prophet, he's a leader, he talks to God, but he doesn't, at least in our tradition, to answer the question, he got part of the message, but he didn't get all the message. Now, that means that, he was a reasonable ancestor to have this stuff being passed down to. So we call ourselves B'nai Noach, but we say all of humanity is B'nai Noach. Every human is B'nai Noach. Everyone on the planet is a child of Noach, which means that they're okay, which also means, by the way, that at least according to the rabbis, as B'nai Noach, they're actually responsible for mitzvot. 7 of them. They don't have 10, they don't have 613, but they have 7. And the rabbis actually discuss what are the laws that are universal laws, and we call those the Noahide laws. There's 7 of them, which we'll talk about at some stage. We've talked about it before, but we'll revisit the Noahide laws. There's not exactly complete agreement in the Talmud what are the 7, but there's a consensus of what the 7 are, and they're basically the 10 commandments stripped down of things like there's no Shabbat, there's a couple things that aren't there, but there are things that are part of the 7. I think you kind of make sense, or like universal laws. Would we say that today? Probably. There's probably, we'd say there's some universal morality and universal standards of living that we would say that we can't tolerate people doing these things.
Is this your second time around doing this?
Mike's?
Yeah.
It's
time?
third, fourth, third,
Yeah, I have to go around another time.
third, but-
At least they're probably 4.
maybe. Yeah, it's possible, but it's
You learn something new all the time.
well, it's also, if you do it every 7 or 10 years, you definitely do.
You ever switch up what you do Tuesday?
Oh yeah, we have to. We're going to have to reformat both, but Tuesdays. So Glory's question is, will we reset it? Yeah, but Tuesdays we're set for the rest of the Bible for another 2 years.
Oh,
Oh,
There you go. No, I mean, we know Wednesday, we're going to have to figure out what we're doing. And we have some we've had some discussions about what we do on Wednesday.
High level.
Well, look, hey, John, if you go through it 4 times, you get to have some say. No, there's been through it too. She remembers it though, Mike. I'm just kidding.
So I assumed that I missed that part.
You did.
That I wasn't as studious as I should have been to figure out. No, it's fair. I mean, it looks like a lot. That sometime during
Genesis?
and Exodus, Genesis, the end of Genesis, beginning of Exodus, I think that that there was some discussion that the 3 sons of Noah, right, eventually.
Yeah.
How God then chose the descendants of Shem
Shem.
as opposed to, I missed that.
No, what happens is that there's no statement that Shem's family are going to be, Shem's descendants are going to be the ones. And so the Bible doesn't formally say, hey, Shem's the chosen one, but it does say in Genesis chapter, chapter 10, that God blesses Shem and Japhet and curses Ham. But it doesn't say specifically that Shem is going to be it doesn't say specifically that Shem is the chosen one without Japhet. Because Japhet is right there, but
Who are the descendants of that?
Europeans.
Oh,
Yeah. The closest people that came into that world by that period are the Greeks. And so the Ionians are mentioned specifically, but the Greeks, the people in Asia Minor at the time. So those peoples were European. So, all right, but we'll talk about it more.
If you get bogged
No, but it's interesting because
down.
we will come to that. And when we get to the passage, John, that I'm telling you from Deuteronomy that reminds us that the Egyptians are not all bad, we'll point it out. We'll maybe delve back into the genealogy because it's coming up. So this is Deuteronomy chapter 7. I'll just show you quickly. Well, it's a few weeks, but if you look, I'm going to just show it to people because John has raised it and because it's a good question because it's not one that again it's not one that we're going to get to like next week. Right here, if you look at Deuteronomy, it says it's giving us a list of people. It says right here, no Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation, no Ammonite or Moabite, because they came out and tried to curse you and they were not good to you, right? But then it says, you shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your kin, right? They're the descendants of Esau. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, for you are a stranger in that land. Children born to them may be admitted into the congregation of Adonai in the third generation. So here's a weird law in the Torah that basically tells us that the Egyptians can come in quicker than the Ammonites and the Moabites, who are descendants of Lot. And the Ammonites and Moabites are Semites. They are Semites. But because of their behavior, they don't get to come in. Whereas the Egyptians, you were strangers in their land. Now, again, you'd think, that's crazy because they're Hamites and they made us slaves. I mean, nope. It says that eventually those people can get in. And Edomites, for whatever reason, maybe because they're closer related to us, doesn't really say. Yeah, but we'll get to that in a few weeks. And in the meantime, we'll go back to chapter 7. But there is stuff in the Torah. You will get to it, and we will talk a little bit more about these people when we get to it. So back to chapter 7 and back to where we were. So there's the Egyptians. And again, here it says, your God, Adonai, will also send a plague against them until those who are left hiding perish before you. Do not stand in dread for them, for your God Adonai is in your midst, a great and awesome God. Your God Adonai will dislodge those people before you little by little. You will not be able to put an end to them at once, else the wild beasts would multiply to your hurt. Which now answers the question that some of you may have been asking. Why didn't God just destroy the Canaanites like he did with the Egyptians? He threw them all into the Red Sea and got rid of all of Pharaoh's armies. Why didn't that happen? Well, at least according to Deuteronomy, there's a reason for it. And it answered the question right now, which is that if God had swept the land away of the Canaanites, if it didn't leave us the job of clearing them out, we'd have a problem. And that the land would get overrun and it would, we couldn't have replaced it quick enough. Well, that's weird because if there were hundreds of thousands of us, millions of us potentially that came out of Egypt, shouldn't we have been able to just inhabit the places? This seems to tell us that at least when we came out of Egypt, we were not in a position numerically even to inhabit those places. which is kind of interesting. But it answered a question that people would have said, hey, why didn't God just destroy all the Canaanites? Why didn't he wipe them out with a plague? Why didn't he throw them, why didn't he burn them all up? The Torah in Deuteronomy says that it's because we would have had these ghost towns that would have been inhabited and overrun by wild beasts and would have become, ghost towns and whatever. But it's kind of a weird answer because it seems to imply there weren't enough of us to inhabit these places.
We need labor.
Well,
God says, and let them dwell in tents of Shem and let them.
well,
and let them be slave to them.
John's going back to Genesis. You did. You did. So now John is no, you don't have to, other than, as I told you before, that was the justification for keeping slaves in America in 1880, 1850. So that was a proof text for why they can continue to be slaves, the sons of Ham. So anyways, but this is why, again, to some extent, and John's right. You can't, they have a purpose, they have some purpose. And in this case, they're fillers. So, because otherwise there's going to be wild beasts and then those wild beasts will hurt you. Well, here it tells us, your God Adonai will deliver them up to you, throwing them up into utter panic until they're wiped out. God will deliver their kings into your hand and you shall obliterate their name from under the heavens. No one shall stand up to you until you've wiped them out. You shall consign the images of their gods to the fire. You shall not covet the silver and gold on them and keep it for yourself, lest you be ensnared thereby. For that is abhorrent to your God Adonai. That's a toeva. That's a abhorrence. So what's the point here? Well, if you find this nice little statue of Baal that's made out of gold and silver, and you say, I can't destroy that, that's worth a fortune. I only have it for its value, God. I don't worship it. I just think it's worth too much. God says, no, melt it, done it, put it in the fire. Do not, that's not for you. Those pesals, those images, those idols are not for you. You must not bring an abhorrent thing into your house, or you will be proscribed like it. You must reject it as abominable and abhorrent, for it is proscribed. And those words they're abhorrent, they're abominable. So as we said, the word abhorrent is usually a version of the word toeva, taev. There's the word titavenu, it's abhorrent, it's an abhorrent thing. And it's also the word shakets, which is a abominable thing. An abominable thing, a detestable thing. And this is why the word shakets and tishaksenu, right? That's the verb of it. That is why we don't use the word shiksa, because it is a derivative of the word abominable. So that's why we don't use it. It's not we use it because it doesn't mean that anymore. But that's not what it comes from. The word shakets is abominable. It's not a nice thing. I know. We use the word shiksa where it doesn't have that. I know. She's the queen. But the word, when you know where the origin of the word is, it makes it, yes. Okay, good. That's a good start, right? The Dodger update. But I will tell you, that's why, again, the word doesn't have that. Look, sometimes words have a bad meaning, really bad meaning, and then the meaning softens, right? Right? So we can think of words like that in English, that if you knew where the word came from, you'd be like, it's not so bad. But like the word sinister, it comes from the word for, the left-handed, right? So if you think the word sinister is like, oh, it means they're evil, that's what the word sinister means. So sometimes words soften over time and sometimes words harden over time. in their meaning. I'll give you an example, a very strange example of one that like became a unspoken word, and there's really nothing wrong with it. Another Yiddish word that we know, the word Schwarze. The word Schwartz means what? What does Schwartz mean?
Black.
Well, he's Schwartz. That's why I asked him. So Schwartz means, yeah, Schwartz means black. There's nothing wrong with it. But the word Schwarz, yeah, the word Schwarze in Yiddish became a derogatory word because people thought when you said it, you were being derogatory to people. It doesn't mean anything derogatory. But it's not a bad word. It wasn't intended to be a bad word, and it became like a derogatory word. Well, that's because that means that's not a thing you're supposed to say. But anyways, there's words that in Yiddish that have softened and some that have hardened. Shiksa is definitely one that softened. But there are other ones that got unacceptable or really unacceptable for no reason. Goyim is also gotten unacceptable.
Yeah.
It literally means nations,
Right.
but it became a pejorative. Yeah. Anyways, it's just what kind of emotions the word elicits.
Mhm.
And if it's not seen as I don't know how it happens. I don't know how words, like, I don't know how it crosses a threshold so that it's no longer a bad word. I mean, there was a time when the word shiksa was meant to be bad. My guess is that people, as they intermarried, and they were like, well, you say that's what it means, but it's not that. We don't think that's what we don't think what it means. Yeah, but we don't, because it's acceptable and because it's not we don't see it as a bad thing. The word no longer was a bad thing. And I think that's kind of what happens. I think to some extent, the same thing happens the other way when people go, well, the word doesn't really mean anything bad. But when people said, those goyim, they're always, whatever, then it became a bad word. And well, sure, when the words that were attached to it were always negative, and there's nothing wrong with the word goyish cup like if you translated it, it just means a goyish way of thinking, right? It literally means a goyish head, but it's always meant as a derogatory phrase. No one would say a goyish cup is a compliment. It's always used negatively,
Somebody
but it's always
says
used
you're a
negative.
sinister person,
Correct.
it's negative.
It's negative.
And
It
if
didn't
you're a
have,
left-handed person. it's
but that was what the
nothing
people had.
negative.
It's what the feelings of it elicit, right? What the words become, how they become that. So yeah, it's a perfect example. A goyish cup, or saying a shikar is a goy, those are words that were hurtful.
There's not an opposite word of shiksa for a man, right?
There is, it's a shagets,
Okay.
but not a lot of people use that word. I don't know why. Yeah, I know, but I don't know why. I don't know why it didn't get into shiksa became like people know the word shiksa. They don't know the word shagets. The fact that you didn't remember it is not, you're not alone. A lot of people go, why I think they didn't. Honestly, I'm going to tell you why.
Why?
I'm going to tell you why I think it happened. And this is probably the way linguistics, the way that, these things happen. I think what happened is because Jewish men married out before Jewish women married out, that by the time the word became acceptable, it wasn't even like it had already, it had become not even a word to talk about. Like it did, like not in a bad way. It just had no meaning. That's why I think it never took. That's why I think that's a perfect example of why that word didn't make it into the lexicon or the Jewish urban dictionary. All right. So you know what? It's interesting because in 2023 that you could do that, and you can now safely assess what it is, because most of the people who spoke Yiddish on a daily basis passed.
Yeah.
It's fact.
Yeah.
The people who'd say, well, that's not what the word meant. That's fair, but that's irrelevant. If it's part of the urban dictionary, it's because the guy down the street who's not the least bit Jewish uses the word schlep.
Yeah.
Let's face it. I mean, that's how it
Yeah.
gets in there. All right. So you shall faithfully observe all the instruction, right? Ha-mitzvot. This is the word mitzvah, which we start to get a lot in Deuteronomy. You shall faithfully observe all the instruction that I enjoin upon you today, again, hayom, that you may thrive and increase and be able to possess the land that Adonai promised on oath to your fathers. Again, these phrases up over and over again. Remember the long way that your God Adonai has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years in order to test you by hardships, to learn what was in your hearts, whether you would keep the divine commandments or not. And this is an idea that we have not seen yet, though it's somewhat implied. That the 40 years were not only punishment, they were punishment to your ancestors, but for your parents and grandparents. But for you, it's a test. For you, it's a test. That's the word. It's a nes. It's a nasotka, your test. This is your test. And again, to see what's in your heart. Levavka, in your heart, right? We have that phrase over and over again, belly be in my heart. We saw it again in the Jeremiah yesterday, in my heart. Even God says it's in my heart or in my mind. So again, in your heart means not literally in your heart, it's what you're feeling, but also what you're thinking. So that's why sometimes they translate the word lev as mind. When God says in Jeremiah, it wasn't even in my mind. That's the way they translated it, levavka. So sometimes the Torah will translate it as heart, and sometimes will be in your mind. I don't really know why it does that. I guess the translator felt in here maybe makes more sense to say what you're feeling. What does your translation say, Glory, for your heart? Does it say in your mind or does it say in your heart? Yeah, in your heart. And Mary, that's yours, the heart. I would say that at least part of this has to be the mind. A lot of people translate it now in the modern Jewish translation as mind/heart. So a lot of the translations of even the Ve'ahavta today in some synagogues, the English translation will say mind/heart. They won't just say your heart. Heart, I think, is more poetic, right? But to some extent, it's also not effective, and it's not necessarily even the most important thing. Because what really should be the question is it? Yeah, I'm going to check the newest translation of the Reform prayer book. I think that to some extent there's a problem with it, because these laws aren't being kept because you feel good about them, but because you think about them, you know them, and you understand them, somewhat understand them, but that you process them mentally. So I have a problem with a translation that simply says your heart, because I think we usually think of that as being your feelings. Let's see what this translation says. This one says you shall love with all your heart. Yeah, they still use the word heart. Yeah, it's the more funky translations, the more less poetic translations that use the word heart/mind. So, and again, I guess you can be tested with your heart, whether you have the feelings or the emotions or the passions for it.
Heart is in the right place.
Yeah, we say that, is your heart in the right place. But if we think about most of the tests that we go through in life, at least the majority of them, they're mental tests. If you think about it, you spend the whole first 20-something years of your life going through mental tests. Most of the tests that you have is education. Maybe that's not right, but that's most of our stuff. And again, I think if we're really honest about it, and I think Joyce can be the professional on this. I mean, we're processing this with our minds. This is not like magic. It doesn't go into our heart. I mean, we like to say it is, but they didn't understand it that way. They understood that you have to process this. There has to be a mental understanding or mental reaction to it. Something's going on in your head. God subjected you to the hardship of hunger, and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known, in order to teach you that a human being does not live on bread alone, but one may live on anything that Adonai decrees. Now that's a very famous line. A lot of people think that's in the Christian Bible. It's not. It's right here in chapter 8 of Deuteronomy. Man does not live on bread alone. No, it's a great line. And here you can see it in the context. It's really teaching us that that's the purpose of manna, was teaching us that God gives us what we need, and God knows whether we can, get by on this. So it was a test. So it's basically, again, saying that this whole experience of manna, of being in the desert, was to some extent a test of our belief, and also in our understanding, not just when we were in the desert, but every day for the rest of our lives, that man does not live on bread alone. The clothes upon you did not wear out, nor did your feet swell these 40 years. So also, again, according to tradition, their clothes didn't wear out, which my guess is, and this becomes, by the way, one of the miracle, right? Yeah, this is one of the miracles. They got manna, and they also don't have to get new clothes. I mean, new shoes, stuff walking. So here's an interesting, where does that even come from? So again, my guess is that people ask the question. By the time Deuteronomy was written, people were saying, well, where did they get clothes from in the desert? And they're in the wilderness. I mean, you can make the argument, well, they had looms and people spun thread and they did that kind of stuff. But where'd they get the thread from? So there's this understanding that, again, God performed another miracle for us, which is that we didn't run out of, our clothes didn't wear out, which we should have. Bear in mind that your God Adonai disciplines you just as a householder disciplines his son, which is an interesting idea too, that God disciplines us like a parent. By the way, look at the translation of this phrase. Ve'adata im levavcha. Know in your heart? No, know in your mind. So there they translated the word levavcha, your mind, right? In your mind. Bear in your mind. Does it say heart? So Glory's translation and Mary's got heart. Yeah, I mean, it just shows you that they translated that phrase as bear in mind. Yours probably says know in your heart, right? Glory?
Know in your heart.
Yeah. Which is what King James says, know in your heart, know that in your heart. Consider in your heart. Okay. Because they translated it literally. So again, my only point is showing you that sometimes levavcha or lev is translated as mind, and sometimes it's translated as heart. And I guarantee you sometimes in your translation, it'll also translate lev as mind. For example, when we read Jeremiah yesterday, I'm pretty sure that your translation for God, when God says, I didn't even think about it, it didn't say, I didn't even have it in my heart to do it. But I mean, that was Jeremiah.
That's common sense when you say,
Yeah.
My heart, it's really.
Yeah. And we use that phrase today, but we also use this phrase, bear in mind, which is the way they translated it. So they tried to keep an idiom, Vayadata im levavcha, know in your heart or consider in your heart. The translators here felt it was better to kind of keep that idiom there, which is bear in mind. Now, again, there's no exact translation of the word, bear in mind, but that's how they felt the words Vayadata im levavcha. What does your translation say, John? Was that what yours says? Bear in mind? Okay.
I'm starting to think that they want there to be a confluence between your heart and your mind.
Oh, there's no question. But
Right.
for them, it's the same word. For them, when they say the word lev, it means both, which is why some people use the translation now, they use heart/mind. I should look at my Friedman translation. I didn't bring it, but I should look at that, see what it is. By the way, there's the Prager Prager commentary now is out for Deuteronomy too. I didn't bring it. I meant to. bring it. But there's a Prager, yeah, Dennis Prager's Rational Bible has he's only done 3 of the books. He's done Exodus.
Yeah,
Did he do Genesis? I can't remember. He did Exodus and Deuteronomy for sure. And it's either Leviticus, Numbers, or he's done 3 translations. I'll bring the Deuteronomy one next week. For your God, therefore keep the commandments of God, Adonai, walk in God's ways and show reverence, right? Walk in God's ways. La'lechet bidrachav. Walk in God's ways. Walk in God's ways. That's a great phrase. Keep God's commandments, keep the commandments and walk in God's ways. And show your reverence, show your fear, show your respect and awe. Those are all ways of translating the word yirah. So that's another really famous phrase. And these are, these are phrases that, again, to some extent, the Christian Bible reiterated in different ways. Even some of our prophets, reiterated in those ways. But, that line by itself, is a great way of kind of summing up how do we approach life, in our tradition, which is keeping the commandments, walking in God's ways, and showing reverence. Because if you think about it, keeping the laws is important, but also it's an attitude, right? It's understanding that we're not keeping the laws because we're some like robots. So we're trying to be like God. We're walking in God's ways. Yeah.
I hear that phrase all.
Yeah. So it's been quoted, and it is just a great way of kind of approaching life. Your God, Adonai, is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams, springs, and fountains issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and figs and pomegranates, a line of olive trees and honey. Well, I'll finish the line first. A land where you may eat food without stint, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron and from whose hills you can mine copper. So this is a land not only of milk and honey, right, but a land that has a lot of good stuff. Now, this line, chapter 8, verse 8, 8:8, is very famous. Now it's in this same context of God telling us we're coming to a good land. It has water and it has even good geology. Now, this is again a theme throughout Deuteronomy, which is it's a good land. God's giving you this great land. But this verse 8:8 is very famous because this lays out what we call the 7 species. I don't know if any of the commentaries you guys have, does yours have a note for 8:8 that these are the 7 species? I don't know if that was an important thing for the commentator here. So what do we call this? These are the lists of things that the land of Israel can be known for: wheat and barley, vines, figs, which are grapes, that's Geffen, figs, Tena, and pomegranates, Rimon. And then it says a land of olives, Zait. Specifically, it says olive. Does yours say olive oil?
It says olive oil.
Yeah. What about yours, Mary? Yeah. I don't know why they didn't translate that, but I never.
The only description I have covers a few verses. It says a concise description of the rich and fertile land of province that the Israelites were about to enter and possess.
Mhm.
That's it.
So it's interesting. Maybe again, this is something that I've not really thought about, but so you have the grains, wheat and barley, and then you have the fruits, right? Vines, figs, and pomegranates. And then we have these last ones, which are, look, olives are a fruit. I mean, I know, you think of them as a vegetable or whatever, but they're a fruit. They're fruit. They're from a tree and they're a fruit, classified as a fruit. But here it doesn't even say the olives. It says the olive oil. It says Eretz Zait Shemen. So it's to some extent that the olives are good enough for oil, or they're a product of the oil. And then the last thing is Davash, which is honey. Now, we're not exactly sure what kind of honey this is. There's actually debates over whether this is bee honey or whether it's honey that comes from the date palm.
Oh.
So it doesn't say dates, and dates are thought of as one of the fruits of the land of Israel. But we're not sure. We're not sure whether that's what it's supposed to be. Some people think that it might be bees, bee honey, and then other people say it wouldn't have been. I think one of the main reasons, and what's interesting about these last two, so you have 2 grains, 3 fruits, and then 2 what I would call products, finished products, olive oil and honey. However we get that honey, those things, one of them, oil, is used for lighting, it's used for olive oil, for lamps, but also, yes, also for cooking. So olive oil would have been used for that too. And then honey is also used for cooking. So
Is it used for religious purposes?
the olive oil,
Protein?
yeah. So olive oil is used for very much religious purposes,
Yeah.
right? We're going to say for the priests and for the for them to anoint and for them to make a king, for them to literally make a Messiah. They had to have olive oil to make the king.
And I recently read that honey is the only foodstuff that never deteriorates.
The carrots, yeah, it never gets old.
Never gets old.
And if you think about it, one of them's kind of for olive oil. When we use it for cooking, it's usually for cooking like, not necessarily sweet stuff, but kind of like savory stuff. So you have one savory thing and you have one sweet thing. And I never really thought about that before, but the 2 finished products, one of them you use for maybe making your food, right? Your meal, and the other one you make for dessert. Use one thing for savory and use one thing for sweet.
And since it's antiseptic, it's used as a.
Olive oil?
No, honey.
Honey,
As a treatment.
Well,
It's-
both of them are
it's
used.
tabernacl.
Both of them are used for medicines. So olive oils would have been used as a base for probably a lot of the herbs or a lot of the medicines that people would have been given an olive oil base. And then, yes, you said, honey is used for healing for a long time. Royal jelly and things like that were used, even pollen. But it's interesting that these are finished products to some extent. Whatever form they were in, they were finished products. So 2 grains, 3 fruits, and then 2 finished products. So the tradition is to have these 7 things represented, or to think about these 7 species as the specifically special foods of Israel. So on Tu B'Shvat, on the holiday of the trees, when we think about the foods from the land of Israel, if we wanted to incorporate things that were from Israel, we would bring these things in together. So if we do a Tu B'Shvat Seder with our kids at school, we bring in these things: grapes, we bring in figs, we bring in pomegranates, and usually some grain stuff, and olives, and usually we bring in the dates for the honey. But again, it is possible that there's archaeologists that have said they did have honey production from bees. It is possible that they did, but we've thought for a long time that they were talking about date palm honey. But there you go.
Well, they probably had bees because that's what pollinated everything.
Yeah, oh yeah. But the question of had they figured out how to domesticate and cultivate that?
Well,
Yeah. No, they think they have. I mean, they found evidence that it could have been happening in the land of Israel by that period. So they have now established that they found
honeycomb.
honey, they found, apiaries, the beehives, and some of the equipment that they would have used to collect it, that they could carbon date back to that. So now they think it might have been, but they're not sure which one it is. But again, most importantly, these are the products of the land. And then look at this next line. Verse 10, it says, Ve'achalta v'savata u'varachta et Adonai Elohecha al ha'aretz ha'tova asher natan la. Why I sing that is because it's part of the Birkat Hamazon. And so a couple of weeks ago, I told you I spoke at Valencia United Methodist Church, and I talked a little bit about the Birkat Hamazon. And I quoted this line from Deuteronomy because I said, the Torah here commands us to say Birkat Hamazon. It commands us here to say a blessing after a meal, right here. So again, I was showing the Christians, I actually showed them, I gave a copy of the Birkat Hamazon, a short version of it, shorter version of it, with the key blessings, with the 4 blessings. The first blessing of the Birkat Hamazon is for our food. Hazanat Hakol. The second blessing is Al Haaretz ve'Al Hamazon. And it begins with this line: V'achalta v'savata v'rachta et Adonai Elohecha al haaretz asher natan la baruch atah Adonai al haaretz ve'al hamazon, for the land and for the food. So every time we say a blessing, the second blessing is for our land, not just for the food, but also for the land. And so we think about this, and we quoted this line of the Torah in the Birkat Hamazon to remind ourselves that we bless after we eat. So as I was talking to the church, I said, look, you know that a lot of times Christians will say a blessing before we eat, right? A grace before meals. So Judaism has that, but we have a very short version of that. We do Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. And I kind of told them, I said, when somebody asks a Jewish person to do grace before a meal, we're like, what did I say, Hamotzi? And you're like, that's not a really, like, this guy just gave a 10-minute opening blessing for food. Thank you, God, for the food and for our bounty and for us sitting together in fellowship. And people are like, oh my gosh, it's a great blessing. But actually, we do our blessings, the majority of our blessings are after. And that's what I kind of showed them. Now, unfortunately, most of us today don't do that. But there's actually a really wonderful thing about doing a blessing after a meal, which is that it actually gives us a chance to digest our food. Because nowadays we tend to eat and run. And if you do that, it's not very good. It's obviously not good for your body or digestion. And Judaism had a way of actually keeping us and having us sit and eat and do it a little bit more relaxed way. As I also told the group, one of the big differences in the ancient world, and I guess really kind of the things that we sometimes think about today, because of course, when you're a kid, who you have lunch with, now, it's not so much anymore because kids don't really eat lunch, I have to tell you. But back in the day, when we were in school, who you sat with for lunch determined who you were. Let's face it, if you look at Glory's rolling her eyes. But I have a feeling that, again, for people knowing that where they sat, that determined what group they were a part of. But that was the case for most of human history, or at least once we emerged out of caves. But even in our caves, we were eating with our friends and family. But who you'd eat with was very important. And as we know from Jewish history, Jews would not eat with anybody other than other Jews. Number one, it was the only way they knew that they were eating kosher food. But the other thing is that they kind of said, hey, we're eating amongst our people. And it created this, sense of community, even when they were the majority of the community, even when they were trying to figure it out. How do I know that? Because we have the texts that tell us that. But the Christian Bible tells us that too. And so I quoted the book of Galatians, which is one of the Christian letters of Paul, where Paul is making fun of Peter for eating with Gentiles until the Jerusalem church comes and tells him, the people of Jesus's family, the inner circle, tells him, you're not supposed to be eating with Gentiles. And he stops. And so Paul calls Peter a hypocrite for doing that. But the whole reason the story exists is because Paul's saying Jews and Christians should not worry about eating with each other anymore. There's no difference. But the fact that he says that tells us that there was, that early Jewish Christians and early Jews of that time, for sure, were not eating with Christians. But it says that even Jewish Christians, many of them, or at least the Jerusalem church, wasn't eating they were not eating with Goyim. They were not eating with Christians.
Vitally important now in
Where?
Christmas.
Of course.
Where it said
Joyce is absolutely right. Joyce remembers when she was in prison. Who she ate with was very, no, Joyce is absolutely right. Yeah, who you eat with in prison is very, very much determines who you are. As a matter of fact, depending on whether you're even given a place to sit is actually, from my own experience, just being able to have a place at a table can sometimes determine where you are. Yes. So I would see people who were not even allowed to sit at a table until they earned their spot to be able to sit at the table. Oh yeah, they did not get to sit down while they ate. So we believe that we're supposed to eat, but you're supposed to eat your fill. And I don't like this translation very much because the words ve'achalta, ve'savata, uvarachta really are three different things. Here it says that if you've eaten your fill, There are actually three things, V'achalta, V'savata, Uvarachta. Yes,
I have something.
yes,
It's
Okay.
kind of associated, so
okay,
how do you square Genesis 15
yes,
or 16, where Sarah,
yes,
Sarai,
yes, Sarai, yeah, she's still Sarai, yeah,
allows Abram,
uh-huh, right,
Abraham, to sleep with Hagar.
uh-huh,
He bears him a son,
uh-huh,
so that's
yes,
not intermarriage, but
Yeah.
it's right.
yep,
With, sorry, I had to go back and I caught my eye with Deuteronomy. Where Deuteronomy.
Says that you're not supposed to.
7,
Yes.
3, 4, whatever, around there where it says you shall not let your daughters and their sons, your daughters and sons.
Yeah.
So, what, all the way back in Genesis, it was okay.
Well, I will say this, there's definitely, there doesn't seem to be consistency with that, especially since Moses himself is married to a woman who's Midianite. So for the fact that Moses is saying now, look, the Bible also says that people could convert, though he doesn't really say how they did that in those days, but there is an understanding that yes, individuals can convert, but they have to convert and join the people in order for you to marry them. That would have been the traditional Jewish answer for 2,000 years, and it still is, right? So there are people, I'm not saying I'm one of them, but there are people who will say a Jew cannot marry a Gentile. Now, so much so that if you went to, let's say, John Stolman moved to Israel next year and said, I'm no longer with Glory, you wouldn't even have to get a divorce. Well, you'd have to for legal reasons in Israel. But as far as the rabbinic authorities in Israel, you can marry somebody tomorrow because your marriage to Glory is not annulled. It's never existed. So there are people to this day who say you can't marry a Gentile. It's not legal. It's not recognized. So it doesn't even need to be annulled. It never existed. So from the standpoint of what Abraham did, there are people who'd be saying, well, Abraham really shouldn't have done that. Sarai giving him permission didn't make it right. And even if he did what was right, Ishmael is not the descendant that was the one that continues on our people or continues on Abraham's line. And more importantly, it wasn't a wife. The Hagar was never his wife.
My point is, right, God knows everything. He knew what happened, yet he still anointed Abraham based on this minor.
Yeah, but he already been anointed, but he had already been chosen, not anointed.
Well,
He'd already been chosen.
Well, no.
He's chosen in chapter 12, and that's in chapter 15, 16. So he's already been picked.
So he's transgressed even after he was picked.
Yeah, but you could make the argument, that he did. I mean, there is, look, according to some rabbinic sources, and I'm talking about from 2,000 years ago, what Abraham did was wrong. There are other people who say that it wasn't wrong. He just didn't know any better, or he was following his wife's recommendation and he did what he did what he was supposed to do. But it doesn't end happily. It's not a good solution. Nobody would point to that and go, oh, that's what you're supposed to do. Look, some of the relationships of interfaith relationships, if you will, are fine. Other than the fact that, I mean, you don't really, you have to be careful. And this is what, look, I'm not making the argument because again, I have no issue with it, but the argument would have been, okay, those are the exceptions to the rule. Yeah, you're not supposed to.
I'm looking for some biblical precedent.
But it's not. But see, the exception of the rule is not the precedent. It can't be. Because if you say, well, it worked out for Abraham, and he's not the only one, right? Judah had a relationship with Tamar, was his daughter-in-law, and ends up having kids that are the Judites, that are our ancestors. But that's not what was supposed to happen. Nobody said that was supposed to happen. And Tamar was a Canaanite. So there are exceptions, and to some extent, they'd say they prove the rule. What the Bible is saying in Deuteronomy is don't go out and marry these people as a whole, because they're going to bring their practices to you. If there's a random Canaanite, as I said, Tamar was one of those Canaanites, then they're clearly, you could do it. But you don't want to point, like the rabbinic argument would have been, but you're not supposed to do that. That's not what you normally do. Ruth is a convert to Judaism. She's a Moabite. She's from one of these people that I just showed you briefly. The Deuteronomy says you don't let him in the community. Well, I'm sorry, that's King David's great grandmother, and by the generations, she's not allowed in the community. So there definitely are things in the Torah that are contradictory when it comes to Gentiles. And you could say, oh, it's written by different authors. Some of the authors were much more strict than others. Or you could say that those are exceptions and those are not what you're supposed to do. A traditional reader, an Orthodox reader, is not going to say it's written by a different source. They're not going to say Genesis is one thing and Deuteronomy is another. They can't say that. But they'd say, well, it's in Genesis and it's not what you're supposed to do. And to some extent, there's this understanding within the Torah that if you look at the stuff that goes on in Genesis, and it's difficult because the rabbis want to have it both ways. They want to have us know that Abraham knew all the laws, that God really did tell Abraham everything. Like Abraham knew it, Jacob knew it. But it's tough because they say that because they don't want us to think that Abraham didn't really follow the Torah. They don't want us to say, well, Abraham was chosen by God. He didn't have the Torah. But there is this other real belief in Judaism, and definitely in traditional Judaism, that they didn't get the laws until Mount Sinai. So everything that happens in Genesis was kind of like they were fumbling around. But they don't want to say that Abraham was really fumbling around. They want it both ways. They want us to know that Abraham did know better, that God when God chose Abraham, he told him everything that's going to be in the Torah, because they don't want us to have a development. That's one of the things I think that Orthodox Judaism has a real problem with, which is that somehow these things developed over time. They don't like that idea. They like the idea that God told it to us and gave it to us at Mount Sinai, and boom, and then it was on everybody. Because if the laws develop over time, that means to some extent that the laws are still developing, and they can still develop, which means they can still change. And people don't want to have that. In traditional Judaism, that's really, really interesting. Now, again, you say, well, they wrote the Talmud. That's filled with laws. They believed that all those laws that they wrote down in the Talmud were given at Mount Sinai. They believed that was the oral Torah that was given at Mount Sinai, and it just wasn't written down. And they believe that. They believe that in their hearts. They believe that those laws were given by God to Moses, and he passed them down orally. That's very important for them. And so when they wrote it down, they were just writing down what was already there. They just said the oral law was the oral law until that point. And so there's no difference for them of those things. And so to some extent, because that was always there, the oral law was there too, they're not developing it. And so when a person asks a rabbi today, hey, can I use an elevator on Shabbos? And they come up with an answer, they're not making a new answer. They don't believe, hey, so-and-so is making an answer. He's deriving it from, and he has to quote sources from the Torah and from the Talmud. He's got to go to the Torah, though. At some point, the laws have to go back to the Torah. And even if they're tangential, it'll say, okay, well, the Torah says not to strike a match on Shabbos. Okay, that's why we don't use an elevator. That's why we don't use electricity. But we also don't, then it develops over time. And then, the rabbi who's giving an answer will quote a source from, 1700s, but they also always have to go back to the Torah. They have to go back and say that these laws were given at Mount Sinai, which, by the way, is a very good lead into this thing. Take care lest you forget your God Adonai and fail to keep the divine commandments, rules, and laws, which I enjoin upon you this day. And there's the word again, mitzav chahayom. Oh, by the way, I just want to tell you one other thing, though, about the v'achalta v'savata v'orakta. Before, and again, John, that was it's a great discussion. It's a great point. What's the logic here? How do we come up with laws? I want to point out that because the Torah says v'achalta v'savata u'v'orakta, that's a 3-step process. You eat, you're satisfied, and then you bless. So one of the reasons why we don't say a blessing before we eat, well, we do, but we say, thank you, God, for the food that I'm about to eat, this bread I'm about to eat, these grapes I'm about to eat. By the way, there's no blessing for meat. No blessing for meat. It's a general blessing. It's a blessing for food. It's not a blessing for meat. Interesting, right? But for fruit of the vine, fruit of the ground, from the earth, or fruit of a tree, we have blessings for.
So we're meant to be vegetarian.
Maybe I didn't say that, but there's blessings for it. But it also is, by the way, when it told us it's a land of milk and honey, it didn't say it was a land of cows and goats. But anyways, it does tell us that we're supposed to eat and be satisfied and then bless. Now, what's interesting about that again is that we believe that as much as we thank God for the foods that we have that we're about to enjoy, we must thank God after we eat. We must recognize how lucky we are. Now, that's why we have a tradition that you have to eat a little bit more than just having a nibble. If you have a snack, you don't have to say the Birkat Hamazon. You don't have to say it if you have. Well, sometimes our snacks, the Pringles that I ate today turned out to be much more than a snack. All of a sudden they were, where they went away. So yeah, but well, because like everybody else, I had a minute and I reached in and got them. But I literally ate them as I was walking out the door and kept coming back. I go, no, I got to get a couple more. But yeah, you don't say a blessing for that. But definitely don't say a blessing for a Pringle. What is that? It's not even food. But anyways, but you're supposed to be satisfied. So is, I don't even know. Who knows? It's a chemical. It's a chemical. It's a chemical.
There's salt in there.
There is something.
It's justified on it.
No, but I will tell you that the blessing is said when we have a meal. So you don't have to say Birkat Hamazon over a snack. But when you're eating satisfied, savata, then you bless. So it's a 3-step process. You eat, you're satisfied, and you bless. So you have to have all this. I guess not. Now you're making me hungry for a Snickers, because that's Snickers tagline. Satisfied. I'm satisfied with the Snickers. No, I Lion Bar. Oh man. Oh my gosh. I want to think about that. Anyways, so we have a tradition though of wanting, again, of understanding that's being satisfied is truly a blessing. And so then we thank God for that and for the land. So we thank God for the food and for the good land, right? We got to thank God for the earth. So, and then it says, when you've eaten your fill. So I said with this next law, the next rules, again, enjoying upon this day. So we're starting to see laws kind of manifest themselves. They're starting to come out, but these are not like very clear yet how they're laws. They're kind of like, they're popping up, but like that's a law to say the Birkat Hamazon. But like, I have to like tell you that that's the law to keep Birkat Hamazon, to say Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after meals. But we're starting to see them pop up. When you've eaten your fill and have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and your flocks have multiplied, and your silver and your gold have increased, it says, and everything you own has prospered. Beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget your God Adonai, who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. There we go to Egypt again. Who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its seraph serpents and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, who brought you forth water from the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your ancestors had never known, in order to test you by hardships, only to benefit you in the end. And you say to yourselves, my own power and the might of my own hands have won this wealth for me? Well, obviously you don't do that, right? So you came out of this desert, and again, here we have not only no water, no food, nothing. It was terrible. It wasn't good. But you also had these serpents, these fiery serpents. If you look at the note, it says, again, fiery serpents. So these are scary things that we had to deal with in the desert. And don't think it's because of what you did. Remember that it's God, your God Adonai, who gives you the power to get wealth in fulfillment of the covenant made on oath with your fathers, as is still the case. So remember that it's God who gives you the power to be wealthy. So this is an interesting idea because, again, it's an interesting translation. My guess is that's not your translation, Glory, for verse 18. The power, it doesn't say that, right? It may say. Verse 18. Mary, what does yours say? Oh, it says the power to get wealth. What does yours say?
Ability to produce wealth.
Yeah, I like that translation better.
ability.
The ability. Power's okay, but it seems to imply that power almost to me implies that it's like your position. Maybe I'm wrong, but like,
Power of yourself.
yeah, the word, what's the word in Hebrew? I'm just telling you what the Hebrew word is. It's koach,
Okay.
strength.
In
So
a
now
sense,
you,
The strength to study
correct.
and do what you need
but
to
when
do.
when I say power to you, you sometimes think that's your position, right? That's your,
There's the concept.
correct, but power has that connotation. If I say the strength or the energy, what does your translation say, Gloria?
It gives you the ability.
Yeah, ability is good. Energy,
Go back to verse 17.
energy, and you said yours was my own power.
My verse 17 says my power and the strength of my hands.
Yeah,
Produces wealth.
I like that translation too.
I like my
Yeah.
power and the might of my own hand.
Yeah, but that's not the translation. The strength of my own hand is fine, but koach isn't just power. It's strength, it's ability, it's the energy. I mean, koach, if you say I don't have the koach today, we oftentimes are saying I don't have the koach, I don't have the strength, right?
Right.
I've heard that word all the time. I've never really.
Yeah. Koach,
I'm
right?
like,
I don't have the,
You need to throw you. that
and
in.
you use it, you
Old people can learn.
you use this, we use it in Yiddish too. I don't have the koach,
Right.
right? Koach. It's koach, right? But in Yiddish, we say koach, which is the energy. I don't have the strength. It means like I'm just tapped out. I can't do it. But power seems to imply, at least to me, to some extent, that it's like, it's because of your station,
It's a
right?
position.
It's your position. Yeah.
You'd be good for me, or someone,
Right.
Yeah.
but it's not saying that.
It should, but you shouldn't think that that's what it says. Yeah, Jesse.
Well, power is good though, because power comes from the source of all power. Because he's giving it.
There's no question.
he's
there's-
giving it to me, But also because
Good.
I'm thinking power is an empowering.
Yes.
Like I'm empowered
It,
to
sh-
make choices to
if-
better myself.
if you think, yes, if you think about power that way, it's definitely the way to do it. And we think about it. I'm powering it up. I'm powering up the car. I'm powering up my computer, whatever. You're giving it energy though.
Right.
We're giving it the ability to start working. But that's what it really implies. It means that God is giving us that energy because it's not my own power. You're not supposed to say my own power. You're going to say that, but that's not where it is. The energy comes from God. And that's what's nice about this is that we think, we're supposed to think about the fact that the energy to do these kinds of things comes from God.
But unfortunately, some people forget that.
Yes, but I don't want people to think that God gives us the power to, the position to do that, because you don't have to have position to do that. See, that implies that if you can't do it unless you're in a position of power in order to do it, right? And that's not what it means. It clearly means, and that's why Glory's translation is a little bit better, is the ability, because actually ability seems to imply that anybody can do it.
Energy.
And it comes from God and it comes from inside, but it doesn't come from your position in the community. It's not because you're a king or the leader that you get to do it.
Should say tool.
Yeah, but ability, strength. Yeah, this is what it means. And again, it's coming from God, and it's coming from God because God has a covenant with you to do that. And it's still in effect, which again, the translation is this is as it's still the case, but that's not the literal translation, which is why I'm guessing, Glory, that your translation doesn't say as still is the case, but to this very day or something like that.
As it is today.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mary, same thing. Yeah, because they didn't translate the word. They says as still is the case. Now that's the meaning of it. It's me saying it's still the case. But that's not what the word says. And that's why I pointed out to you. Because
Does this translation, that's still the case, go back 2,000 years?
no, but it's going back to the 80s. It's giving you, it's going back to 1986. the translation is fine because it's giving you that meaning, but it's not giving you the fact that the Torah is in Deuteronomy is giving this wonderful
Yeah.
repetition over and over again of the word Yom. Yom Hazeh, this very day.
What's the oldest,
Translation?
like, does it go back to, BC?
Well, the Hebrew does. How we translate that is important because
Because
most
that
of,
would be fun to go through it that way instead of through modern English.
well, you have to learn Hebrew. You have to learn Hebrew then. You have
That's the oldest.
to learn Hebrew.
Well, why can't you just take each Hebrew word and translate it? Oh, I see, because koach, you mean
Right.
God.
And also you have a translation here. The English translation we have here, the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, it's not a bad translation. It's telling you what the meaning of it is. It's a nice way of saying it. It's poetic to say as it is to this very day. But that's what it says. But I also like the fact that it says Hayom, this day. If you do forget your God Adonai and follow other gods and serve them or bow down to them, I warn you this day, right, that you shall certainly perish. Like the nations that Adonai will cause to perish before you, so shall you perish because you did not heed your God Adonai. And there the line is very clearly, and we're going to see it again, saying it's a warning, and it's telling you, don't wind up like them. You can become like the Canaanites. So lest you think that it's just about marrying them and worshiping their gods, it's not because you're genetically superior to them. You can wind up behaving like them, doing what they're doing, and then being punished like them.
Which is crazy when you go back to the reason that it happened, right? Because they saw Noah naked because he was drunk.
Yeah, but it's also again, it's also behaving like the Canaanites in the sense that when we read in Jeremiah yesterday, and that we've read it, that you are not just worshiping other gods, but that you're sacrificing your children to those gods. And that's what they were doing.
But at the time that bifurcation happened, right, way back, right, in Genesis, those things hadn't happened yet. They only happened because they were,
Well,
right?
yeah,
Right?
but Genesis, but Genesis is a reflection of what, at the very least, even if it's history, which I don't think it's history, I think if there's a purpose, Genesis was not supposed to be read as history. It was supposed to be read as a warning and as a guide for how we got to where we are today. So it's very important. I loved it. Bless you. I love Genesis, but it's there. Those lines are there. Every one of them is there for a reason. And so the lines from Genesis that talk about the Canaanites are there to remind you who the Canaanites really are. So almost everything in Genesis has a setup. There's a setup for it.
But had that one issue not occurred, okay, I know what if, but if that one situation not occurred, right? And all the boys came in and they, dad had a good time, and instead of making fun of him, then right? I mean, so none of those things had occurred yet.
Well, other than the fact that
The Canaanites weren't there.
but we believe that was written after the Canaanites were already there. We believe that story, because we believe the story explains why the Canaanites are messed up. Was there a story like that? Maybe, but we believe that the story.
Before that night.
Well, look, at the very least, Moses copied that down, right? So if you're going by the traditional understanding that Moses wrote the book of Genesis as he was writing down the history of the people, which is the traditional answer. If you're going by the traditional answer, it was still written after the Canaanites already existed. No matter what, if Moses is writing it down and saying, and following what God says, which is again, the traditional answer is that Moses was, God dictated it to Moses. Moses wrote down what he was saying. Moses is writing it after the Canaanites already exist. Moses would have been putting his pen, his stylus to the scroll. The Canaanites already exist.
How? They were descendants of Ham.
Because when he wrote it in 1200 BCE, the Canaanites he knows where he's going. He's going to the land of the Canaanites. So if he's telling the people, if God wants the people to know, hey, this is where the Canaanites came from, then it definitely had a purpose.
Are you saying the Canaanites were there before Ham existed?
No, I'm saying that the reason that the story exists to some extent is because the Canaanites were still there. Look, if the Torah talks about people that are no longer there, well, the Torah doesn't. Look, the Torah only mentions nations that the Israelites are going to come in contact with. The Chinese are not mentioned in that list.
No, but it says over the course of 2,000 years, the world then becomes populated.
Fine, but
And then they had one.
gosh, I actually just saw a movie, a TV show where people are, it was about the Chinese in San Francisco. That one of the guys goes, "There's no Chinese in the Bible," which I'm sure people said at the time. Where are the Chinese?
If Ham hadn't done that one thing,
Yeah.
right? And he would have been cast off.
Okay.
He would have been the bad one.
So
And all of his descendants are bad.
so what was,
There'd be no Canaan, there'd be Canaanites. but
well,
they'd be
one way or the other, right?
Israelite.
One way or the other, either the Canaanites are bad because their ancestors bad and they're normally bad. Not all of them, but mostly bad. They're gonna normally be bad. Or the story is written by people who said, the Canaanites are bad. You know why? Because this is what happened with their ancestor. So one way or the other, it either explains what they felt about them, or the story existed, and one way or the other, we got from point A to point B, and now this is who they are, and this is why we don't like them. So one way or the other, the Canaanites are bad. And again, they deserve it. And here's the point. You don't want to deserve it either. You don't want to, because you will perish just like them. Okay? Now, chapter 9, and this is where we're going to finish today. Hear, O Israel. Same words, Shema Yisrael, right? So now you're starting to see that the phrase Shema Yisrael is not so unique in the book of Deuteronomy. It's a very, very common opening for something. Look, here, pay attention, Israel. What's the translation in yours, Glory?
You are now about to cross.
No, what is the hero Israel? What does it say? Oh, it does? So Mary, yours says hero Israel? Yeah, so they like doing that. So listen, pay attention. Of course, we say hero Israel, Shema Yisrael. Notice, by the way, here they have an exclamation. Yours probably doesn't have an exclamation. Yeah. So that's a Jewish thing. Mary, yours doesn't have an exclamation, does it? Colon, yeah, there you go. You are about to cross the Jordan, not exclamation. Hear, O Israel. You are about to cross the Jordan to go in and dispossess nations greater and more populous than you, great cities with walls sky high, a people great and tall, the Anakites, of whom you have knowledge, for you have heard, who can stand up to the children of Anak? And again, probably there's a note in your Bible, Glory, that these are giants, right? Verse 2.
It says Anakites, but it doesn't say anything. There's no, it says C note on 128. Hold on.
128?
Deuteronomy 128.
Oh, okay.
I have that too.
So the Anakites are the giant peoples that live there amongst either some of the Canaanites are Anakites or, yeah. Is that what the note says?
Inhabitants of Canaan described as giants.
Yeah, so there you go. The Anakites are giants. Who can stand up to the Anakites? Now, what's interesting about, of course, the Dodgers can. Mike all of a sudden is a Dodger fan again for a day. He's going to be a 1-2 days in a row. So, no, the Anakites are giants, right? The Anakites they're huge people. Now, again, Goliath was maybe an Anakite, but it clearly says that Goliath is a Philistine, or he's working for the Philistines. So either the Philistines had co-opted some of these Canaanites, or
Discovered any bones of these giants.
no,
Oh,
we haven't found bones of giant people, though we do think that, anybody who was 6'5" or higher would probably be considered a giant. You did? You sat next to a giant? 6'9", yeah.
Because every human mythology always mentions giants.
Yeah.
There's the Jotun in Nordic.
Yeah.
The giants there.
Every
There's been
culture has stories about giants.
legends about in the Middle East giant peoples. To the current day, there was a mishap in the Middle East where these soldiers had come across this giant cave and they're like, what is this? Because it was on the patrol route. They went up to it. This has happened in Afghanistan like 5 years ago. And a giant spear skewered one of the soldiers and a giant came out and killed half of them. They're like, what on earth just happened? And they reported it, obviously, grabbed one or two of the dead guys, and the government was like, no, can't mention that. They just scrubbed the whole document.
So whether giants exist, everybody believed, everybody believed that there were giants. So every culture believed it. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 6, to go back to Genesis, that we are the descendants, that these giants were descendants of the fallen ones, right? The Nephilim, which is what we also read in Numbers. It says that the giants that the spies encountered were descendants of these people. But God is going to destroy them.
Yes.
So in Genesis chapter 6, at the beginning of Noah's time, there were giants in those days too. But to some extent, the flood had to destroy those people. At least in our minds, that's part of what the flood does, is destroy these giant people. And then it says again, know then this day, Hayom, Vayadata Hayom, that none other than your God Adonai is crossing at your head, a devouring fire. It is God who will wipe them out, subduing them before you, that you may quickly dispossess and destroy them as Adonai promised you. So God will destroy these giants. And when your God Adonai has thrust them from your path, say not to yourself, Adonai has enabled us to possess this land because of our virtues. It is because of the wickedness of those nations that Adonai is dispossessing them before you. And this is a critical idea.
Not that you're so good, but they're so bad.
Exactly. As Joyce said, it's not because you're so good, but because they're so bad. And don't, of course, become like them, because God will do the same thing to you that he's doing to them. This is a cautionary tale. And it's also reminding the people that, yeah, God promised it to your ancestors. We just read that. But there's a double thing here. And so when people say, why did God make us wait in Egypt, right? At least according to the Torah, and again, from that extension in our minds as Jews, that we had to wait. We had to wait for those people to be judged bad enough for them to be thrown out. So to some extent, we had to go through the Egyptian bondage. That was our waiting period. And we had to go through that until these people proved that they were wicked enough to then be dispossessed. Now, all of this goes into the question, well, which is it? Is it because they're so bad? Because God was ready for us? Because God promised us? Maybe because we are now numerous enough to do it, because that definitely is in the back of their minds, because we just said we couldn't go in there even right away because there wouldn't be enough of us to fill those cities. So all of these things are part of our consciousness of why it happens the way it happens. But there's no question why this is here, which is to warn you not to go down the same road.
Now, went down to Egypt, were those people already there?
That's the Canaanites, right? The people of Shechem. Those people were Canaanites. The Bible says, and the people said they were there, right? They were there already.
They stayed.
Yep. And then we are allowed to come back up. But how was Ham's book? Again, at least according to the Bible, the Hamites were not supposed to be there. They were not in that. That's not the region they're supposed to be in. Mike, what are you going to say?
Since many books ago, Amalekites.
The Amalekites, yes. So where are they? Well, they don't seem to be here right now amongst the Canaanites.
Were they also descendants of Ham?
No, that's the crazy thing about Amalek, is they're actually descendants of Esau.
Oh, that's right.
So they actually are even Esau, our cousin,
Who's the descendant of?
Amalek. The Amalekites.
Is Ham, Shem, and.
Yeah, but that's early, right? Much later on. I mean, Esau's grandfather is Abraham, right? Isaac is Esau's father. Isaac is Amalek's great grandfather.
So there are cousins.
They're our
They're
cousins.
descendants of.
So Amalek are Semites, and they're evil.
They're not Jews.
No, they're not Jews, but they are descendants of Isaac. We're not allowed to.
Yeah.
We have to. And we'll get to that in Deuteronomy too.
Oh, will we?
Oh, yeah, the commandment to massacre the Amalekites is coming up.
But
What?
there's a law.
Mhm.
Well, there's no Amalek anymore. We don't have to do it because there's no.
Go to a cop. Well, he was an Amalekite.
No choice. I had no choice. Now, there is no Amalek unless they self-identify as Amalek. But if somebody comes in and,
Oh, come on.
what?
So.
We'll get to that when we talk about the Amalekites again. I had a whole class. I had a whole class in rabbinics. I had a whole class, a 10-week class on them. 10 weeks, 5 weeks. It was 10 weeks, 10 weeks of nothing but Amalek, studying Amalek the whole time. Well, the person who was teaching it was trying to make a point that, this is not like, we didn't stop talking about Amalek just because they were wiped out. Who's Amalek today? I mean, if you go to Israel today, they'll tell you Hamas is Amalek. They'll tell you that Iran is Amalek. Hitler was Amalek. So people who try to destroy us become Amalek. If they vow themselves to destroy us, then they're Amalek.
But they become.
They're Amalek. Which means that according to our tradition, they have to be wiped out. That's the,
Tyranny.
so that's the,
And that's where we always goof.
well, I understand, but see, the problem is we're getting off subject, but when we get to Amalek, we'll discuss it.
All right.
But if these people are Amalek, they have to be wiped out.
So after World War II, if they escape
Look,
South America.
Yes, they have to be yes, they have to be wiped. When we have to wipe them out. So but if they're Hezbollah and they're in Lebanon now and
Yeah.
so that gets to the rabbinic discussion from today, and we'll get back to it. I promise we'll get back to it when we read it. I'll just leave this with you, is that people, that's why I said self-identify. If they say that they want to destroy the Jewish people, we take them at their word. And therefore, then we have to destroy them.
Okay,
Right?
so they self-identify. I got it.
They self-identify. They say we want to destroy,
themselves.
yes, they say we want to destroy the Jewish people. Therefore, it's incumbent on us to destroy them before they have that opportunity. We take them at their word.
Yes.
The only reason why I let us talk about this now, today, the only reason why, again, we could talk about it every week. But why do you think we have this discussion right now? No, you didn't open your bear.
No.
Philip, why are we having this discussion today, Philip, who texted me the minute that this came down? Philip, Kelly, wake up, Philip. Why am I discussing this?
And we're here, we're listening.
Philip, why, Philip?
No, I missed it.
Why are we talking about destroying people who say they're going to destroy us first?
Preemptive strike.
Why?
Because the guy from the Pittsburgh killings was sentenced. to death.
Cheryl got it. Mike, you were going to say it too.
Oh, yeah.
Today,
Oh,
he was sentenced.
I love to witness that.
He's going to be executed. The person who committed this horrible massacre at the synagogue was sentenced today to death.
You still have the death penalty?
yeah.
On a federal level.
Oh, was it federal?
Yeah, that's why they went after him for the hate crime. So there's a big question now whether the federal government will allow it to be enacted. Why are you shaking your head? Philip, what do you think? Is it going to happen? You're a lawyer.
The Biden administration has a hold right now on any federal executions, but I think it's going to be very difficult to ignore the jury's decision.
How upset will you be if Biden doesn't allow this to go through.
He's gonna convert.
John just said you're gonna convert. John's dreaming, but I think Philip will be pretty upset, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it will happen. I just, I think the appeals process will play out. But in the federal, in the
I
federal
don't want to
system.
put, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but based on the text that I got from you today, is you're concerned.
No, the federal appeals process is not like the state appeals process. It moves very quickly. So it might be 3 years from now,
Yeah.
maybe less.
Let me read you the words that Philip Wasserman sent me today. The Biden administration needs to respect the jury and carry out the sentence.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I said.
That's what you said. So yes, we're going to hold you to that, Philip.
No, I mean, they should. Well,
Yeah, they need to. And again, when someone self-identifies as someone who wants to destroy the Jewish people, we take them at their word. In this case, the guy acted out. So it's not a question of saying it. He did it. So yeah, he needs to be taken off this planet.
I agree.
So with that, we won't finish up with that, but that is why it's very relevant. So
the other thing, by the way,
Yeah.
that exists in this case is that there's really there really isn't any evidence that there are mitigating circumstances. That,
you don't have, you already made the case, Philip. You're good. No one's arguing. Everyone agrees with you. You need to know we all agree with you.
Yes.
All right, you'll explain it hopefully when it comes through, and let's hope it's not in 3 years. But anyways, it's not because of your virtues and your rectitude that you will be able to possess their country, but it is because of their wickedness that your God Adonai is dispossessing those nations before you, and in order to fulfill the oath that Adonai made to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Torah didn't forget about it. It's saying they're both there. The reasons are both there, but it's also because of that. And it's not because you're so good. That's one of the things you need to know.
Right.
Know then that it's not any of your virtue or of yours that your God Adonai is giving you this good land to possess, for you're a stiff-necked people. You don't deserve it. You don't deserve it. Remember, never forget how you provoked your God Adonai to anger in the wilderness from the day you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place. You have continued to be defiant towards Adonai. At Horeb, you so provoked Adonai that Adonai was angry enough with you to have destroyed you, right? Right there, you were making idols. Yes. Jesse.
Asking questions about the translations, because they're all
Yep.
Jewish Bibles translated directly from Hebrew.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that that's not a, as we said, a more
So I'm assuming
expressive.
5,000 years ago was different.
Why? What's the word you're wondering?
No, because I was just reading that on my book, and mine was different because the stiff neck thing was an actual quote.
Oh, well, that's fine.
Moses said, Moses was saying, "Lord, I'm having this problem because these people are stiff necked."
Does yours have quotation marks in it? No, Glory. Okay. So the words Am Kashay Oref could be in quotes because that's what we're known as. We're known as a stiff-necked people. So no, that's exactly.
Moses was saying this as a dialogue back and forth between God saying, like, I'm having, like, these people always think they're virtuous, they're stiff-necked, I'm having issues with them, and God saying, X, Y, Z.
Yep. So again, Moses is reminding the people that you're a stiff-necked people, and that's what you're known for. Am Kashay Oref. So this is a phrase that we have over and over again in the Torah, a stiff-necked people, and so that's why it can be in quotes. There's no reason it shouldn't be. I mean, it's actually kind of a cool thing to remind people that that's what you're known as.
I was just thinking that as well, because when I speak about the Bible with my friends, because they're Protestant Christians, so theirs went through like 4 or 5 different languages.
There's no question.
So
But a
I'm
lot of
thinking
translations.
saying that because he reads the Old Testament, he's much more confused about it. I'm like, well, yeah, because it went through like 5 languages.
Correct. It went through Greek and Latin, and there definitely is an emphasis on translating. There's no question. I will tell you though, Jesse, that the King James translation is so powerful for us, even as Jews, that that whenever anybody translates something, they actually, and I mean really translates it and says, well, we're trying to get a translation out there. They have to be careful of upsetting the King James. It's such a powerful translation. It's really such a great translation. It's because here's one of the things that King James did. The King James translation is a poetic translation. It tried to keep the rhyme and the rhythm of the Hebrew. Many of the English translations, including the Jewish translations, have not tried to do that. And so we recognize that the translators of the King James translated it from Greek, from Latin, and then into Hebrew, to English. But they also had Hebrew translators with them. The people who translated the King James for King James, there were also Jews or people who were raised Jewish in the court who were brought in to help in that translation. So it's not like they didn't know, and they didn't know what the Hebrew meant. They actually had Jews that helped them understand what the Hebrew actually meant. So it's, but part of the problem is like today, I was at a funeral and I'm reading Psalm 23, and it's very hard for me to read the translation that I prefer of Psalm 23, because, you know, he maketh a table before me. I don't like to use the word maketh, but makes a table before me in the presence of my I don't want to say mine enemies, my enemies. I want to say mine enemies, but it's such a powerful translation that you almost, and again, a lot of times it's written out that way. In the books at Eden Mortuary, it's the King James. It's not even the JPS translation. Do I want to say my cup runneth over, or do I want to say my cup overflows? What is your, oh, no, you don't need to turn to Psalm 23, but you know, they're not necessarily like the different idea, but there's a poetic translation and then there's a more literal translation. And then there's the ones that are like trying to capture the idiom, like bear in mind, instead of the word, know in your heart. So these translations all are going after different things. Look, the reason that will occasionally show you the Hebrew is because I want you to know it doesn't have to be translated that, and it can be translated with other words, like when we looked at the word koach. So occasionally I'll show you that because sometimes the translations, I think, they're misleading us, and if they're misleading us, then I want to point out. But usually they're not that bad. If like the thing about putting it in quotes, that's a great thing. You can put it in quotes, you can make it italicized to say, hey, this isn't the first time that God's called us a stiff-necked people. So that's a translational decision. Again, whether you put an exclamation point after something because you want to say, look at Hero Israel, it says Hero Israel again. So these are all translation decisions that sometimes they translate the same word. It's how they punctuate it, or it's how they put it in quotes, or they put it in capital. They capitalize something so that they're making a point that it's God saying it. So sometimes the translations, it's not even the word, it's the way they write it, or it's the way they punctuate it. So these are all really important discussions. And again, like I said, when it's really something where I want you to see the Hebrew, then I'll definitely point it out. And it happens. It happens. So yeah.
You're the one where saying how Jews are stiff-necked, and that's because God's arguing with God.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, my people are stubborn. I'm gonna take your arguing with him.
Yeah.
You're arguing with God. Of course, your people are stiff-necked.
And here we're going to have it when we pick
right
it up
there.
next week. I see that this is a stiff-necked people.
Okay.
Vahine. So so we will have it. And Moses, and when we pick up next week, we're going to be reading about Moses's his take on what happened at Mount Sinai. And so we'll read that next week. So that's part of probably actually one of the more memorable parts of Ekev. But I will tell you, so now if you say, well, what's in Ekev, that we always say, Birkat Hamazon. So you can always say, what's in this portion that we carry with us, it's that. So there is something every week. And as I said, next week, we're still going to be reading Ekev. So the Torah, weekly Torah reading, next week will be a Re'eh. And so we won't be caught up because Re'eh, we don't get to until chapter 12.
Chant there, right?
I'm going to chant, I'll at least do the Maftir. That's right, in honor. So there's Re'eh, which we probably will get to, in probably in 2 weeks, we'll get to Re'eh. So we'll be like 1 week behind, but there you get Re'eh Anochi, see this day I set before you a blessing and curse. We'll get to those great lines from there, which also contains in Re'eh, just for our own reminder, the laws of kashrut. So there's a lot of stuff coming in, and that's when we start really getting into the commandments, repetition of it. So again, we'll be in person next week.
Great.
And we have services this week with Wendy. And again, lots of stuff coming up. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Stay healthy and stay happy, hopefully. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody. Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody. for being here.
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, David.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Bill.